Daniel Reeves was the model state trooper, and Emily Sutter was the rising star beside him. But behind their badges lay a secret affair that would end in betrayal, a brutal murder, and the shattering of a quiet New York town's trust in its own protectors. The arrest of Sergeant Daniel Reeves sent shockwaves through the Halstead State Police barracks. Once a figure of authority and admiration, he was now escorted out of the station in handcuffs by officers who had worked beside him for years. The department released a brief statement acknowledging the charges and vowing full cooperation with the investigation. The community, stunned and betrayed, struggled to accept that the man they had trusted to protect them had committed such a brutal and calculated act. Prosecutors moved quickly, building a comprehensive case. The evidence was overwhelming. Forensic reports tied Reeves to the burial site. His fingerprints were on the flashlight used to inflict the fatal blow. His GPS history and surveillance footage contradicted every alibi he had offered. The messages between him and Emily revealed a relationship strained by secrecy and fear. The recovered email drafts painted a chilling picture of a woman on the verge of exposing a truth that could ruin him. During the trial, every detail of the case was laid bare. Former colleagues testified about seeing signs of the affair: subtle changes in behavior, unexplained absences, and moments of tension between the two troopers. Expert witnesses described the timeline of Emily's death, the condition of her remains, and the physical evidence that led investigators to Cold Hollow Forest. The prosecution argued that Reeves, fearing the collapse of his career and marriage, decided to eliminate the one person who could expose him. The defense tried to cast doubt on the digital evidence, questioning the interpretation of messages and the credibility of forensic timelines. They painted a picture of a man overwhelmed by stress and betrayed by a complex personal situation. But the jury was unconvinced. The facts were too strong, the trail of evidence too direct. After just 7 hours of deliberation, they returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Reeves was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read, only staring ahead, silent and still. His fall from grace was complete. The man once honored for bravery and community service would spend the rest of his life behind bars, remembered not for his service, but for his betrayal. The department faced its own reckoning. In the aftermath of the trial, an internal review was launched into how relationships among officers were monitored and handled. Policies were changed. Training on ethics and conduct was expanded. The leadership vowed that no future warnings would be ignored. Emily Sutter's family established a foundation in her name, dedicated to supporting women in law enforcement and raising awareness about power imbalances in the workplace. Her story, once hidden in whispers and secrecy, became a symbol of the importance of accountability, even among those sworn to uphold the law. The town of Halstead never fully recovered from the betrayal. But it remembered Emily, not just as a victim, but as a young woman who stood for truth in a place that tried to bury it. Her voice had been silenced, but in the end, justice spoke loud enough for both of them. The search team moved into Cold Hollow Forest just after sunrise. Snow had fallen steadily overnight, adding another layer to an already difficult terrain. It was cold, silent, and isolated. The forest stretched for miles, filled with winding trails and uneven ground. The GPS trail from Sergeant Reeves's patrol SUV had led investigators to a remote clearing deep in the woods, far from any main roads or hiking paths. It was the kind of place someone wouldn't stumble upon by accident. After several hours of scanning the area, one of the cadaver dogs picked up a scent. A few yards from the base of a frozen slope, hidden under a tangle of branches and partially covered in snow, searchers found what they had feared: a loosely concealed tarp, thick with frost. Beneath it was the body of Trooper Emily Sutter. She was still in plain clothes, what she had worn to work the night she disappeared. The condition of the scene made it clear that this was no accident. This was a burial site, hurried and careless, left in a place chosen for secrecy, not sentiment. Emily's body showed signs of blunt force trauma to the head. There were marks on her wrists, suggesting she had been restrained. Her hands were scraped, as if she had fought back. Lying nearby in the snow was a heavy-duty flashlight used in standard-issue patrol kits. It was smeared with what looked like dried blood. Forensic teams bagged it carefully. Later testing would confirm that it bore both Emily's blood and Daniel Reeves's fingerprints. News of the discovery sent a shockwave through the department. What had once been a missing person case was now a confirmed homicide. Inside Reeves's home, a search warrant was executed. In the trunk of his personal vehicle, detectives found rope fibers identical to those found on Emily's body. Muddy boots in the corner of his garage matched the soil composition from the burial site. A pair of work gloves tested positive for trace blood, despite having been washed. There was more. Reeves's uniform from the night of Emily's disappearance had been dry cleaned the next day, an unusual step for a routine shift. Investigators later found traces of forest debris embedded in the seams, pine needles, crushed leaves, and microscopic soil particles that matched samples from Cold Hollow Forest. On a shelf in his basement, tucked behind boxes, was Emily's missing duty belt. It had been wiped down, but forensic tests revealed partial fingerprints. The mounting evidence left little doubt. What had once seemed like a complicated relationship between coworkers had turned into something darker and far more violent. Emily's decision to end the affair and possibly report it had threatened to destroy the image Reeves had spent years building. Instead of facing the consequences, he had chosen to silence her permanently. But in trying to hide his crime, he had left behind a trail of proof, each mistake tightening the noose around his own neck. The truth, once buried in snow and silence, had finally begun to surface. As the search for Emily Sutter entered its fourth day, frustration turned into suspicion. Investigators combed through her digital records, looking for anything that might explain her sudden disappearance. Her phone history was minimal, too minimal. It had been wiped clean of recent messages and call logs. That, in itself, was unusual. Emily had never been secretive about her digital life. Her phone habits were normal, her online activity routine. But in the days leading up to her disappearance, large sections of data had been erased. Digital forensics specialists were brought in to recover deleted content. What they uncovered shifted the entire investigation. Text messages, fragments of voice memos, and email drafts pointed to an intimate relationship with Sergeant Daniel Reeves. The evidence suggested they had been involved for months. There were coded messages, shared locations, and plans to meet after hours. More disturbing were the drafts, unpublished emails Emily had written but never sent. In one, she described feeling trapped. In another, she referenced the fear of professional backlash. And in the most revealing one, she hinted at wanting to report the affair to Internal Affairs. She hadn't decided when, but she was close. Suddenly, Daniel Reeves wasn't just a colleague, he was a person of interest. Investigators pulled his GPS data, checked his patrol logs, and analyzed surveillance footage. Reeves had told supervisors that Emily left the barracks shortly after arriving that night, but the cameras didn't support his story. There was no footage of her leaving the building. There was no exit captured, no car driving away. In fact, her vehicle never left the lot. Then came the biggest break. A traffic camera positioned along a remote highway caught a State Patrol SUV around 2:11 a.m., heading away from Halstead. The vehicle was traced back to Reeves. This route was not part of his patrol assignment. It led to Cold Hollow Forest, a desolate and icy stretch of wilderness rarely traveled in winter. When asked about the footage, Reeves claimed he had gone to check a disabled vehicle reported by a passing motorist. But there was no such report logged. No calls had come in. No vehicles were found. More evidence began to pile up. A review of the patrol SUV's onboard GPS confirmed that it had remained stationary in Cold Hollow Forest for over 40 minutes before returning. Reeves had never mentioned this stop in his report. His logbook contained vague entries with no details about time or location. When confronted again, his story grew shaky. He appeared calm but overly rehearsed. He insisted that Emily had left of her own free will and that he hadn't seen her after midnight. Yet his version of events was quickly unraveling. Meanwhile, co-workers came forward anonymously, revealing that they had suspected something between Reeves and Emily. They described quiet arguments, moments of tension, and subtle changes in behavior. No one had reported it. Reeves was respected, even feared, by some. But now, with the evidence growing, silence was no longer an option. Something terrible had happened, and the walls around Daniel Reeves were starting to crack. It was a bitter Tuesday morning in January when Trooper Emily Sutter failed to report for duty. Snow had fallen heavily overnight, blanketing the roads and slowing everything down. But Emily was always punctual. Her shift was supposed to begin at 7 a.m. By 7:15, her absence was noticed. By 7:30, the silence from her phone started to raise concern. It wasn't like her to be late, and certainly not without a call or message. At first, her supervisor assumed maybe she'd gotten stuck in the weather. But when repeated calls went straight to voicemail and there was no response to text messages, worry started to grow. An hour later, two officers were sent to her apartment for a wellness check. They knocked. No answer. The landlord provided access. Inside, the apartment was quiet and undisturbed. Her uniform was hanging neatly in the closet, her badge and utility belt placed exactly where they should be. Nothing was overturned. Nothing looked out of place. Her bed was made, and there were no signs of forced entry. Her personal vehicle was missing from the parking lot, but her purse and cell phone charger were still inside. It was as if she had stepped out momentarily and never returned. By noon, the search intensified. A missing person report was filed, and the state police began an internal inquiry. While the public remained unaware, behind closed doors, the department was mobilizing quickly. Surveillance footage from the previous evening showed Emily's car entering the state police barracks parking lot around 8:42 p.m. She was seen walking inside. That was the last recorded sighting of her. No footage showed her leaving. No witnesses reported seeing her exit the building. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Investigators reviewed logs and sign-in sheets. Emily had been scheduled for a routine overnight shift, paired with Sergeant Daniel Reeves. His name appeared on the roster, and he had signed off on several reports around midnight. When questioned, Reeves claimed that Emily had left early, citing a family emergency. He said she had driven off on her own, looking distressed, but refusing to elaborate. His explanation raised eyebrows, but there was no immediate evidence to challenge it. Still, something didn't sit right. The timing was vague, the story lacked clarity, and Emily had never mentioned any personal issues to anyone else in the department. As hours turned into days, concern deepened. Search teams were deployed around Halstead and surrounding areas. Canine units were brought in, drones scanned wooded regions, and flyers quietly made their way into nearby towns without triggering media attention. The department wanted answers, but also wanted control. At home, Emily's family grew frantic. She had spoken to her sister the day before, making plans for the weekend. Nothing had seemed unusual. There were no signs of distress, no hints that she might have left voluntarily. Her disappearance didn't make sense. The deeper the investigators looked, the more they suspected this wasn't just a case of a missing trooper. Something darker was unfolding beneath the surface, and someone was lying. In the small upstate town of Halstead, New York, the state police barracks sat quietly at the edge of the woods, a sturdy red brick building that had been there for decades. Life in Halstead moved slowly, and the troopers who worked there were often more concerned with helping lost hikers or directing traffic after football games than tackling serious crime. Among them was Sergeant Daniel Reeves, a 39-year-old veteran of the force. He had the kind of record any officer would envy: commendations for bravery, glowing performance reviews, and a spotless disciplinary file. Around town, he was the model of authority and professionalism, the guy who helped at food drives and coached youth soccer. No one questioned his integrity, and that's how he liked it. Reeves had built a solid reputation over 12 years of service. Married for 10 of them, with 2 young children and a home in a quiet cul-de-sac, he presented himself as a devoted family man. Few people knew that things weren't as perfect behind closed doors. His marriage had grown strained and distant. He spent more nights at work than he needed to, volunteering for late shifts, finding excuses to stay out. That's when Trooper Emily Sutter came into the picture. Emily was 28, energetic and sharp, with a reputation for being both efficient and fearless. She was part of a newer wave of recruits, tech-savvy, observant, and determined to make a difference. People noticed her. She'd only been on the force 3 years, but her rise was fast. She often worked with Reeves. Their partnership made sense. She learned from his experience, and he got a dependable officer who covered his blind spots. They logged long hours on patrol, shared reports late at night, and gradually became inseparable at work. What started as casual friendship slowly evolved into something else. It began with private lunches, then long drives that stretched longer than necessary. Texts at odd hours, moments that lingered a bit too long. They believed they were being careful. They used burner apps to communicate, avoided obvious behavior at the station, and never rode to events together unless duty required it. Still, the chemistry was visible to anyone paying attention. A few whispers circulated, but no one confronted them directly. After all, Reeves was respected. Emily was admired. It was easier to ignore the signs than face the awkward truth. The risk was real, and they knew it. An affair between coworkers, especially one involving a married officer and a subordinate, could destroy careers. For Reeves, the consequences would be devastating, not just for his job, but for his home life. For Emily, the fallout could end her career before it truly began. But neither of them stopped. It became something they needed, a secret life that felt exciting and invincible. As the months passed, the emotional stakes rose. So did the danger. Eventually, Emily began to have doubts. She hinted at wanting to end things. She kept a journal, started backing up messages, and quietly gathered evidence. Reeves sensed it. And that fear of exposure, of everything unraveling, began to take root.